Thank you, Sue Ellen, for that wonderful introduction. You are so dear to me. And thank you to all of the sponsors and everybody who supports the book festival and supports these wonderful events. We are in a really special and almost sacred space. I love that we celebrate books, I love that we celebrate ideas, and I love that we come together as community here to do all of that. And this is a very special treat for me tonight because I'm here with Eric Holder, a man of ideas, a man of principle, a man who happens to be a very trusted friend and very dear to me, and someone who has not stepped out of the spotlight but has decided to step into a righteous space at a moment where we really need his voice and his wisdom and his leadership. So before we begin talking about your book, I just want to tell you that I have a deep well of gratitude to you for writing this book and for helping to set our national compass on the things that are important. So thank you very much for writing this book.
Thank you. Well, I would say after those kind words, I should probably get up and leave. It's not going to get much better than that.
No. It's going to get much better. You were on your way to writing a different book.
Yeah.
And you decided to set that on a shelf and instead write Our Unfinished March. Right. Why was it important for you to write this book in this moment and set the other book aside?
Yeah, the other book is a memoir that is about not only my life, my brother's life, but our father's life as well, and how he influenced us. So it's been a long effort. But it also seemed to me that this moment required that book, that our nation is at a critical time. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic or alarmist when I say that I think our democracy is under attack, that there have been systematic efforts to make it more difficult, at a minimum, for certain people to vote or to prevent people from getting to the polls, attacks on our electoral infrastructure. What you see happened on January the 6th and what preceded that, what happened after that. It just seemed to me that this was a time, as a former Attorney General, to talk about our unfinished march. And when I said, it's interesting, if I could do it again, I might have retitled that, because
Why? I think it's a very strong title.
Well, you see, it says Our Unfinished March, and I don't want people to think that I'm talking about African Americans in our unfinished march. The our is really America. It's America's unfinished march, from our founding ideals to all the trials and tribulations that we've gone through, and to the place where we are now. And as great as this country is, as exceptional as this country is, we're not yet at the place where we need to be. The march is an unfinished one.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the word our, because when we talk about voting rights, the effort to reduce access to the ballot, to limit access to the ballot, has a significant impact on communities of color, right, on people who are poor or disenfranchised. And so is the word our important in that sense also? Because sure, people sometimes think that that's someone else's problem, and perhaps someone else's problem to solve.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that if there's a group of people who don't have access, as they should, as citizens, to all that is great about our democracy, that is not only a problem for them, it is a problem for us. The book in the first part talks about the history of excluding certain groups of people from the vote. This has been something that has been with us as long as we have been a nation, and it is not only something that is racially based. I mean, the first people we talk about in the book, in terms of trying to get access to the ballot, was white men who didn't have property. White men.
So if you did not own property, you could not register to vote.
Right, exactly. I mean, when George Washington ran, only 1 in 6 people actually were eligible to cast a ballot. And if you were a white man who didn't have certain amounts of property, you did not have the right to vote. And so they organized and got themselves the right to vote. It's interesting to see, it's in the book, you see some of the founders talking about, well, if you let these men who don't have sufficient amounts of property, you let them have the vote, they will be easily bought, they'll be easily persuaded because they clearly don't have, their words, they clearly don't have the intellectual capacity, to actually, cast a vote in an intelligible way. And some of the other founders said, well, wait a minute, if you give the vote to men who don't have property, you're going to put something into the veins of this country, the bloodstream of this country. Other groups are going to demand the right to vote. And they'll say, women will ask for the right to vote. Oh my God, women will ask for the right to vote. And one goes so far as to say, you could even have a time when Negroes will ask for the right to vote, like, let's not get ridiculous. And so there was the thought there that they were going to start something. And to be fair, other founders, Ben Franklin said, well, all right, so this property requirement. All right, you're a guy and you own a jackass, and the jackass is worth $50, all right? And so that gives you the right to vote because you got to have $50 worth of property. He says, if between this election and the last one, the jackass dies, you don't have the right to vote. Well, who actually has the right to vote? You or the jackass, And so it has been a constant struggle, white men without property, women, African Americans, on a couple of occasions, fighting for the right to vote. It has been an ongoing struggle in this nation, one that we've not fully resolved.
In the beginning of this, I read something like this, and I'm kind of ashamed that I didn't know as much of this as I thought I did. It wasn't just that you had to own land. I knew that,
right.
But you had to own the right kind of land.
Right. Right kind of land. It had to be arable land. It had to have a certain worth to it. It wasn't, it wasn't just, well, yeah, I own, those trees over there and little thing with the bench. No, it had to be, can you grow crops on it? I mean, all kinds of restrictions. The founders were extremely concerned about, and the Electoral College is a manifestation of that, about just letting us decide the direction of the nation. Concerned that if you just let the untutored masses, just the population of the country, that they would not again have the intellectual capacity, could easily be bribed, a whole range of, they didn't just trust, after having fought a revolution and, write great words in the Declaration of Independence, great words embodied in the Constitution, but there was still a desire to kind of keep at a distance, the masses from real power.
At the halfway point of the year, every year they look at the search engines that we all use and determine what are the words that were sort of really people focused
Right.
on in a year. And at the halfway point, it's clear that democracy will probably be one of the words that will be in the top 10 words when they determine what was really on people's minds, particularly when they turn to primarily Google,
Right.
to try to learn things. And it's interesting because democracy is a word that we have always sort of taken for granted in this country. And we can't take that for granted right now. Why do you think we've always taken democracy for granted, despite the fact that democracy has always been this elastic thing that has been rather fragile from the very beginning?
Yeah, I don't think all of us have always taken democracy for granted. I think that for those in certain positions of power, they've taken democracy for granted. But for those of us who have not always had the benefits of democracy, it was not something that we took for granted. Now, when I say we, again, I'm not just talking about black folks. I'm talking about women. I'm talking about young people, into the 70s. You go to war, but you couldn't vote until you turned, 21. There are a whole range of people who looked at certain people in our country enjoying the benefits of democracy and feeling excluded and taking action to try to get themselves included and trying to perfect this thing, this American experiment of ours.
There, is a case, I'm going to be careful, I'm just going to call it Shelby.
Okay, yeah, we don't call it the Shelby County versus Holder case,
Well,
know?
you just did. I wasn't going
No,
to.
I said, well, I'm just saying this is what we don't call it. That's like saying Dred Scott v. Holder. You wouldn't want your name associated with a case like that, So it's just a Shelby County case.
So,
An abomination of a case in 2013. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
but when that was decided in June of 2013, you said that this undermined your view of the court.
Yeah,
And at the time, you were trying to put a somewhat optimistic spin on it, and that may have been something you were required to do as Attorney General and as someone who the rest of the country would look to. Did you understand then or even imagine what was to come? And do you look back now at the way you interpreted, or at least explained what happened in Shelby? And would you rewrite that script now?
it's an interesting question. Eric Holder, regular citizen, Shelby County, I would have said, that's nuts. I mean, you're going to have all kinds of problems. You've gutted the Voting Rights Act. You're going to take the Justice Department off the field. As Attorney General, I couldn't say that. I mean, I couldn't say that you have taken away from the Justice Department, maybe substantial parts, maybe the majority of the power that we have in terms of, policing our electoral system around the country. I wanted to try to put a positive spin on it, to attack, take some shots at the decision. But if I had known then what I know now, and how quickly, states and localities decided to use the Shelby County decision to put in place a whole range of anti-democracy measures, I think even as Attorney General, I would have been maybe a little more negative about it. I mean, I remember talking to Don Verrilli, the Solicitor General, in the lead up to the Shelby County case, and he said, I think it looks bad. And I said, come on, man, they've gone through hearings, you got hundreds, thousands of pages of testimony, hundreds of exhibits. It passed the Senate unanimously. It passed the House with, I think, 10, 15 people who didn't. Signed by George W. Bush, a Republican. You're not going to do anything with this. And when he called me from the court to say 5-4, we lose, I was shocked. I guess as we'd gotten closer, I started thinking, Don might be right, I might be wrong, but I didn't think they were going to I didn't think they had it within them.
Were you shocked by not only the ruling, but Robert's explanation that we had come as far as we needed to as a country, or that we no longer needed these kind of protections?
Well, the decision is at tension with itself. I mean, he talks about America has changed, Okay, America has certainly changed, but has America changed enough, Mr. Chief Justice, to warrant doing what you did to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. But he also says that there's still, electoral issues, this voting discrimination that still exists in the country. So I'm thinking, well, America's changed, there's still voting discrimination in the country. Okay, so why would you do away with the thing that the Justice Department, our main tool to try to make sure that our system is fair? I mean, Justice Ginsburg, said it best. He said, you're standing in the middle of a thunderstorm and you've got an umbrella over you and you're not getting wet. So you say, it's a logical thing to say, well, I'm not getting wet, it's raining all over the place, I'll take down and put away the umbrella. No, you're going to get wet, and that's what's happened since that decision back in 2013. America has gotten wet with just a deluge of really anti-democratic, anti-American measures to try to keep certain people away from the polls. I mean, one example, Texas. They put in place this photo ID requirement. All right, so if you have a photo ID that says you have the ability to carry a concealed weapon, state issued, all right, that's good enough. You can show that and say, I'm Eric Holder, get in there, you can vote. If I'm Eric Holder, a student at the University of Texas with a state issued photo ID, and I say, hey, I want to vote, they say, oh, nope, not good enough. So they're making a determination there. All right, student, photo ID, not good. Concealed carry, photo ID, that is good. And so, it wasn't just, we're going to have photo ID out there to stop this non-existent fraud. They really showed what it was all about and what kind of ID was actually going to be acceptable. And that's that's just one example.
So a lot of the action around this is percolating now in the states.
Yeah.
200 bills in 41 states. I think that number is actually higher than that now, both in terms of the number of states and the number of bills. How do you inoculate yourself against that? I mean, how do you reverse something that is now codified in so many states?
Well, here's the secret, The United States Supreme Court is not going to do it for us, all right? Not in the near or medium term. We've got to win elections. We got to win elections. And we can't just get excited when Barack's running. Oh, let's go, We can't get excited only about presidential elections. We've got to win at the local level, at the state level, and understand that these laws that have been put in place didn't come from the Mount, and they're not written in stone, and they are not like the 10 Commandments. Virginia is a good example. Republicans put in place a whole range of anti-democratic voter suppression measures. Well, Democrats won both houses of the state legislature, had a Democratic governor, and what did they do? They reversed them and said, all right, you know what? We don't need photo ID. We're going to expand the amount of time in which you have to cast a ballot. And what did we see? Substantial increase in the number of people who voted in Virginia. No indication of fraud. And so that is, I think, the answer. We can talk about the court, and I certainly have things in there about what we ought to do with the Supreme Court. But at a most fundamental level, we as citizens have to be more engaged in our democracy. And that's the history part of the book. In their time, a whole bunch of people, Americans, looked at the problems, the issues of their day, organized, committed themselves, dedicated themselves, sacrificed sometimes their lives, and made America better. They dealt with the problems of their time. And the question is, are we going to deal with the questions of this time, of our time?
This is not the first time that I've talked to you about your book. Mm-hmm. And it seems like once again we're talking on the tail end of an election.
Right.
And an election that has showed us that when we're not in a presidential race and facing a presidential campaign, that turnout numbers are not what you would hope that they would be. And the America that we hope to see, the America that we deserve, runs through the ballot box. You say that in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But our voting record is insufficient. People don't seem to understand that. And I know that, we both grew up in households where our parents would never, they go out in the rain. They would take time off. They'd figure out how to vote first thing in the morning so they wouldn't be late for work. When my father died, in the top drawer of his dresser, the little velvet line drawer where you keep your cufflinks and things like that, he had all of his I voted stickers.
Right.
All over the inside. It meant something to him.
Yeah.
And we don't do that. How do you reverse that?
I think you've got to make people understand, first off, there's a debt that has to be repaid. There's a whole bunch of people before us who, as I said, sacrificed, committed themselves, dedicated themselves, so that people like us would have that right to vote. Earlier, people imagined an America that they had never seen, that they had never had the ability to experience, but thought through the work that they did, their sons and daughters would have that ability. And so there's that debt. That's the first part. The second thing is that I think we have to understand that our history tells us that if you have a committed, dedicated American people, we can change everything. Dr. King organized, a great civil rights movement, not only him, but others as well, and tore down a system of American apartheid, and I'm sure there must have been moments when they thought to themselves, are we going to be able to pull this off? I mean, are we going to be able to end segregation? And they ultimately did it. I talk about a woman, Alice Paul, in the book. 1913, she marches along with a bunch of other women down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., demanding the right to vote. They're not jeered, they're beaten, literally beaten, as they walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. She then stays with it. In 1917, what's called the Night of Terror, she's protesting in front of the White House, has been doing so for a couple of years. She's arrested along with a bunch of other women. they decide to go on a hunger strike, they take tubes, put them down their noses, and force feed them. Woodrow Wilson, who I got problems with on a whole other range of issues, is so moved by what he sees them go through that he comes out in favor of, finally, women's right to vote. But again, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they worked for an America that they had never seen, some of whom never actually lived through, and that's what we have to do as well. We have to understand that, I have a whole list of things in there, a whole list of reforms that I think we ought
Tick through some of them. Tell us about some of them.
Well, it's interesting, the Supreme Court. What I propose in the book has now actually been introduced in the House of Representatives, so that you limit the terms of Supreme Court justices. You don't appoint them when they're, you don't appoint them when they're in grade school and let them then serve on the court, because you don't have to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court. But you don't, you appoint these folks, and Democrats do it as well as Republicans, in their early 50s, late 40s, whatever, and hope that they'll serve for like 40 years. That's too long for anybody to have that much power in an unelected position. These senators will serve 30 years or something like that, but at least they can be voted out every 6 years. Congressmen serve, too long, but they can be voted out every 2 years. So limit their terms. I say
Is the issue longevity or acumen at a certain age?
Okay. I think I'm not sure that with age comes a certain degree of wisdom, but that assumes a certain baseline. You can be a fool at 40 and just get to being just stupid by the time you're 80. And I'm not talking about anybody, I'm just talking about generally, Let's not but if you look at our history, people were appointed early in the Republic as Supreme Court justices. People lived far fewer years, and they left the court when they died. Now people live much longer, and you see these justices strategically retiring. Justice Kennedy retired when he knew a Republican was going to appoint his successor. Justice Breyer retired. Now, he says he didn't do it because there was a Democrat in the White House, but he was under enormous pressure to do so. And I got to think that had to be a part of why he decided to leave the court. In addition to the fact he was 82, 83 years old. So limit their terms to 18 years. In the book, as I note, Chief Justice Roberts has said he is for 15-year terms. I say 18 years because what I also think we ought to do, and this is in the House bill, is that you'd have a president appoint a justice in his or her first year of their administration and in the third year of his or her administration. So you get 2 Supreme Court justices per term that will be appointed by a president. And if you have 18...
So it'd be cyclical. It wouldn't just be the roulette that we have right now.
Yeah, and hopefully that would depressurize the confirmation process and all that. And if you serve 18-year terms, over time, you would get back to a 9-member court. Because what I also think we have to do is we have to expand the court.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, we can't allow to have happened what Mitch McConnell and his Confederates. That's actually a good word. What they did, to Merrick Garland, you can't have a hearing because it's too close to an election. Well, where does that rule come from? I mean, we've done that a number of times. Oh, Amy Coney Barrett, you can get on the court while people are voting. I mean, this is like, so Mitch, there's a bit of a tension there.
So a little bit of forensics on that. Should the Democrats have put up a bigger fight when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, put up a bigger fight, yeah. Should
they have used a different playbook?
I'm not sure what the playbook would have been, given the fact that McConnell had all the power. They could have yelled more and done more things, I suppose. But would that have moved, McConnell off the position that he had? My suspicion is no. But that's a very consequential thing. I mean, if Merrick had been confirmed, you would have had you'd have 5 Democrats as opposed to 4, appointed justices as opposed to 4 Republican appointed justices for the first time since like 1969. And during that 3-year period, among other things, the Rucho decision would have been decided. That's the one where the court said you can't bring partisan gerrymandering cases into federal court. That would, I think, have gone in a different way, and the redistricting process, racial and partisan gerrymandering would have been, I think, really impacted by that. And so first year, third year, 18-year terms, expand the court.
To what number?
Well, I'd say at a minimum, you've got to do with those two. You got to deal with those two. Those were stolen seats. Those are stolen seats. And so at a minimum, the court needs to expand by 2. The court has traditionally had the number of justices that we have had circuit courts. We now have 13 circuit courts, 12 circuit courts, and the court of federal circuit. So I think that's actually not a bad number.
13
go
or
to
11?
13. Go to 13. I actually toyed with the idea of making it an even number. So, that way, if the court wants to be have a real role, they would be forced to compromise with one another. Now, the conservative bloc can do something. If you had a different way, maybe the liberal bloc could do something without any interaction with the other side. But if you have an even number, then you're going to have to make deals, and maybe that would have a way of, somehow, modifying, otherwise extreme behavior. But ultimately, I think at a minimum, 2, that would be 11, and I think maximum about 13.
Likelihood that will happen?
Not high. I think the possibility, though, it's interesting, if you look at the polling that was done, I guess, a couple of weeks or so ago, overwhelming support for the notion of limiting terms. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, in slightly different numbers, all said that you should, not have life tenure, or that people shouldn't serve that long. Expanding the court, about equally divided. It is not the unpopular thing that I think the media would like people to think. It's kind of splits the people. Although I think in Washington D.C. There is not the desire to expand the court. So that's why I don't think that's likely to happen.
I want to get to some of the news that's been coming out of Washington. But before we do, I just want to tick through some of the other things that you suggest in the book, particularly with voting.
Same-day registration, automatic registration. We should have programs in place so that young people can pre-register at the age of 17 in their schools. And then when they turn 18, they'll be voters. They don't have to go through anything in order to vote. Make Election Day a national holiday so that people don't have to decide, do I go to work or do I vote? I say at a minimum 14 days of early voting, end felon disenfranchisement given the ugly racial history we have there. Increase the number of polling places that we see around the country.
Which have been reduced significantly.
Since the Shelby County decision, we have seen 1,700 polling places closed. And disproportionately closed in communities of color. So when you see these long lines, in Georgia, for instance, long lines of people, waiting to vote, then that bill that they passed in the state legislature that says, well, you can't give food or water to somebody who's waiting in line to vote, that starts to make a little more sense. Okay, we're going to make the lines really long in the African-American parts of Georgia, and we're going to say you can't give people water or food, could be hot, whatever. It doesn't mean everybody's going to leave the line, but if you cut margins by 1 or 2%, Warnock is not a senator, Ossoff is not a senator, Joe Biden doesn't win Georgia. It gets, that 1 or 2%. Interesting statistic. Election Day 2020, Atlanta, Georgia, at night. If you are voting in a white part of Atlanta, Georgia, 2020 election, you had to wait on average 6 minutes. Right. If you're voting same day, Atlanta, in one of the African-American parts of Atlanta, you had to wait 51 minutes.
And we know this because of cell phone data.
We know that exactly.
We're not guessing.
Right.
People aren't guessing on
right.
that.
And so that's, 6 minutes to 51 minutes. And again, it doesn't mean that somebody gets to the 15-minute mark. Not everybody's going to say, I'm leaving. But, if you get a trickle of people, 1%, 2% off, that can have an impact on all these closely, contested elections around the country.
So this goes to that notion of we and our, and I'm not asking this question to shame anybody in this room, but how many people in this room who voted had to wait more than 1/2 hour when they went to vote? Okay, by a show of hands, most of the people who I see raise their hands were people of color. Most of you, not everybody. And I'm just going to put this out there for you to think about. If you had to wait a 1/2 hour or 45 minutes or 90 minutes to vote, would you have more skin in the game? You know, and that's one of the questions of, is it
Yeah.
our problem?
Yeah.
Or is it,
Yeah.
you know, more
I mean-
of a problem when it's my problem?
I mean, you think
someone
about
else's?
it. We send our greatest treasure, you know, the young men and women of this nation, to other parts of the world to try to promote democracy, you know? And yet here we are trying to limit democracy. I remember those pictures in Iraq. You know, I didn't agree with the Iraq War, and those people
The
holding
purple
up those
thumbs.
thumbs with the purple on there, you know, proudly, women proudly showing men, I voted, I voted.
Or the lines in South Africa.
Right,
You know,
to
where
show
people
that,
were-
you know, they voted. And here, in this nation, again, where we spent huge amounts of money, you know, expended huge numbers of American lives so that people there would have the right of self-determination. In this country, we're trying to come up with ways in which we limit self-determination. You know, that's not who we're supposed to be.
So I want to round the corner and ask you about what's been happening in Washington lately.
Right.
What has it been like for you to watch the hearings, the January 6th proceedings, as the former Attorney General?
You know, it's, over the course of his 4 years, I always thought, you know, well, Trump's going as low as he can go. I mean, you know, and he always surprised me. You know, he always found a new bottom. And I thought that I had a sense of what happened on January the 6th. I never thought it was a riot gone bad. I thought there was some kind of, you know, control, whatever, I don't know. But the degree of control of the mob, the lengths to which people went to try to overturn that election. You know, Eastman, the guy Jeffrey Clark in the Justice Department. Trump's statement, you know, to the Justice Department. Look, just say it's corrupt. You know, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of the rest. Trump's statement to the folks in Georgia, to Raffensperger, you know, find me 11,780 votes. I'm kind of like, whoa. You know, I mean, so when people say, you know, how do we prove Trump's intent? I just kind of look like, are you kidding me? You know, find me 11,780 votes. Just say that it's corrupt. I'll take care of the rest. I mean, there's other stuff, but just those two nuggets right there. You're looking at a conspiracy to obstruct, conspiracy to defraud, you know, right there. I know, Lanny Brewer, are you here? There he is, the former head of the Criminal Division of the United States Department of Justice. So Lanny, would we bring this case?
We would bring it in a minute.
There we go. There we go.
But it's been more than a minute.
It's been more than a minute, but, you know, and the only thing I've been critical of Merrick Garland, who I've known for, I don't know, 20, 25 years, is that he needed to be more, he needed to share more. And it's a difficult
You
thing.
need to be more transparent about his process?
About
or-
what the Justice Department was doing. And it's difficult, as Lanny knows. You know, you can't share what a grand jury is doing. There are laws that say you can't do that. Justice Department tradition says you never talk about ongoing investigations. And yet, the American people needed to know that their Justice Department was on the case. And I think over the course of this past week, first the Deputy Attorney General came out, made a strong statement. Merrick had that interview with Lester Holt. And I'm sure that when Lester, you know, you always get requests, you know, we want to interview you, you're the Attorney General. And of course, he'd be a real get. I'm sure that they prepped that answer. And in response to the questions there, and also I saw in a press conference, him saying that we will hold anybody accountable, that we have been working at this for some time. That's what I think should have been done before, because I think that takes a lot of the pressure off the Justice Department, because we now know, as I think, you know, we knew, Lanny and I knew, that they were in the process of investigating this matter. He, as Attorney General, has to protect the institution. You know, the Justice Department, I mean, he took a lot of the grief, but people were saying the Justice Department is not doing its job. And you, as the head of that department, head of the criminal division, have got to protect the people, the career people especially, who work in that institution. And so I think what happened this week was a good thing. He was sharing, I think, sharing appropriately information.
What does it mean for people to be held accountable, and what will that mean for us as a nation in terms of our trust in government, in terms of how potentially ugly the process could get?
Yeah, the process is going to get ugly, you know. Let's assume, and I think there's a certain inevitability here. You know, as we say in the book, these things happen, like Hemingway said, with, you know, bankruptcy, you know, gradually and then suddenly. And I think that I started my career, first 12 years, in a thing called a public integrity section. It's part of the criminal division. And you get a feel for cases after a while. And there are going to be indictments here, high level, I think, indictments here. And I think that is the way in which people have to be held accountable. They broke the law. And you can argue about the Nixon pardon. You know, Nixon did a whole bunch of inappropriate things.
And he was pardoned before he was indicted. It's important to remember that.
Right. That certainly should not happen here. I mean, there should be no pardons before the process, certainly to get to indictment, has occurred. So the Justice Department has the ability to lay out for the American people and for history, you know, what happened. But I don't think that's quite enough, given what they were about, which was to overthrow our democracy. I mean, to really stop, they keep the peaceful transition. No, just the transition of power. I mean, their aim, as we now know, was to delay this thing long enough, come up with these alternate slates of electors, and to leave Donald Trump in place as president of the United States, even though he lost the election, not by like close to 3 million votes in the Hillary election, but like 7 million votes, you know? That cannot be allowed to stand. So accountability has got to be meted out. But beyond that, deterrence. You know, what's to stop, if we let Trump off here, what's to stop somebody 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now from saying, hey, I'll give it a shot. And the worst that'll happen is that my reputation gets besmirched, but I'm not going to jail. You know, jail tends to crystallize things in people's minds, you know. The possibility of going to jail, people say, well, maybe I'm not going to do that, you know. Reputation besmirching, I'll take that risk, you know. I mean, and Trump, you know, besmirch his reputation. Well, you know, how could you do that even more? So I think that people need to be indicted, and people need to go to jail.
But even with an indictment, how?
And the lawyers who supported that effort, Eastman, Clark, they need to be disbarred. They need to be disbarred. They should not be allowed. We all take an oath as lawyers to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. What Clark and Eastman did, and other lawyers, you know, Giuliani, you know, these other folks have done things inconsistent with the oaths that they took as lawyers and should not be allowed to practice as lawyers going forward.
So even with indictments and disbarments, there are still a lot of people who support the aim of the January 6th marauders and could potentially do it again.
Yeah.
They don't see a problem with what they did. They actually do see a problem with what's happening with the January 6th proceedings. How do you cure that?
You know, there's, you know, what Lincoln said, you know, you can fool some of the people all of the time. You know, all right, that's who those folks are. There are people who think the moon landing was faked. You know, I mean, there's only so much you can do. But the vast majority of the American people are not okay with what happened on January the 6th. There's going to be a cadre of people who believe that Donald Trump should be supported no matter what their lying eyes are telling them, that they're okay with the notion of minority rule. And when I say minority, I mean popular, you know, minority rule. They're okay with that. I remember seeing one woman, she was interviewed at a Trump rally, And she said, I just, I never really wanted to have a dictator, but if Trump's going to have to be the one, I'm okay with that. Now, I'm not going to be able to reach that woman. If you're there, I'm not probably going to be able to do much with her. But to get the vast majority of folks, maybe 80% of the people in this country, I don't know, moon landing people like I think maybe 15, 20% think it was fake. There's only so much you're going to be able to do with them. And yeah, as I guess Lester Holt asked the question of Merrick, won't this divide the nation? Yeah, it's going to divide the nation. It's going to be something that some people are going to react to in a very negative way. That is the potential indictment of the former president. But here's the deal. If you don't indict him, that is going to divide the nation as well. And so you end up with indict, divide, don't indict, divide. So just do the damn right thing. Enforce the rule of law. You broke the law. You tried to subvert our democracy. You got caught. We've got proof. Let's charge it, put it before 12 of our fellow citizens and let them decide. And then let the judge make a decision with regard to sentencing. And I say this, I did an interview with David Axelrod, I guess 2 years ago, and I looked at it a couple of weeks ago because somebody had said, Holder's position has really changed. So look at it. And I was very cautious in talking to David Axelrod. I said, indicting a former president is something we should think long and hard about. We've never done that. They do that in other countries where they go after the prior regime. That's not what we do in the United States. But given what we have seen from the January 6th committee and what the media has done a great job in uncovering other things, I just don't see how we can let this one slide. This is just not something that we can just kind of shake our heads and say, well, Trump's gone, and so we'll just forget about it. No, I think people, as I said, have to be held accountable so that there is that deterrent impact.
I want to make sure that we get to questions from the audience, so we're going to go there in just a minute. But before that, I just want to ask you about your relationship with the island.
With the island, yeah.
That you are now spending much more time here with your lovely wife, Sharon. This is a very special place to you.
Yep.
What is it that you love so much about Martha's Vineyard? And what can the rest of the world learn from looking at life here at Martha's Vineyard?
Well, we don't want too much of the world to learn about this place. We want to talk about it's nothing but rich people, and you don't want to be hanging out there too. We want to keep this. No, what I love about this is like Ron Weich, who Lanny knows, was the head of our Office of Legislative Affairs, and when I used to go up to testify before these Republican-controlled committees, and if you saw some of those things, you can remember how much I enjoyed that. He would always say, "Go to your happy place." And my happy place was one of two places. It was either here or beaches in Barbados. And just to make it not monotonous, I'd alternate one or the other. Put myself in that frame of mind to try to get through whatever I was going to have to endure. This place is special to me because I like the combination of the pace and the intellectual activity that exists. You can be really laid back and not let your mind simply, waste away. Have things like this that hopefully you all find intellectually stimulating. But we have, events like this. There's a whole bunch of political stuff to do. And so I love that combination. This is as dressed as I've been for, the last week or so that I've been here. My wife's been looking at my ugly little skinny legs. And that's, I love that part of the island. But I also just love being up here with the people. I'm from New York. I live in Washington, and those can be kind of cold and challenging places. To go to restaurants here, people, hey, how you doing? And people don't know who I am, just to say, hi or something like that. I love that about this place. And plus, having lived in Washington, D.C. now, it ain't as hot as it is in D.C., although temperatures are rising here, and that worries me a bit. But I love, this is my happy place. I love this place.
I could talk to you all night, but I want to share this conversation with the audience. There are microphones that'll be passed. If you raise a hand, we'll get to you. We'll ask you to introduce yourself, and because we want to hear from a few people, if you could keep your questions brief, and if it could actually be a question instead of equatement. Melody Hobson taught me that word. It's actually a question.
Instead of a what?
Equatement, a question that's actually a statement.
Oh, okay.
So a question that actually begs an answer. And we have our first question right here.
Good evening. Attorney General Holder, it's good to see you there.
Hey there.
Enjoying your responses tonight. Question, it seems as if, and I might be totally missing the point, that the Republicans are very good at crystallizing their message and their messaging to America. I don't sense the Democrats are as facile in crystallizing their message to America. Yeah. And I personally wish they were more clear and making their messages clear to the rest of us. Am I missing the point, or is that pretty much on point?
I plead guilty. No, I think that's right. I think that's right. There is a message discipline that Republicans have that Democrats do not necessarily have. So finding the discipline among Democrats, that's difficult. But finding good messaging shouldn't be. I mean, some of the most creative people on the planet are Democrats, You think about all those folks in Hollywood and the way they sell movies and television shows. It's interesting that the January 6th committee has, I think, some TV folks or something who are helping them with the presentation of the video, and they've done a superb job. But I think that is a problem. We don't tell our story necessarily as well as we should. We ought to be concerned about inflation and gas prices and baby formula, all that kind of stuff. But this administration has done a lot of positive things for which it doesn't get credit, at least in part because we don't talk about it enough. And that was one of the things I think we didn't do well enough in the Obama years. We did a lot of good stuff, but we didn't talk about it enough. People say, well, we're concerned about crime now. Well, during the Obama years, for the first time in 40, 50 years, we reduced the crime rate at the same time that we reduced the federal prison population. That hadn't happened, those two measures in 40 years. No one knows that. We never talked about that. That is something that could have been used in the president's reelection. Joe Biden could have used it. Hillary Clinton could have used it, So I think there's a great deal of truth with regard to our messaging. And here's the other thing. Republicans use fear, extremely well. We sell hope and aspiration, and that's a good thing. We don't have to become them, and we should do that. But we should inject a little bit of fear into our messaging as well. The fear being, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get them. And them means reproductive choice goes away, gun safety the possibility of gun safety goes away, climate and concern about the climate goes away. That needs to be a part of the message as well. This is what we've accomplished, this is where we want to take the nation, and this is what's going to happen if you put them in power. But that disciplined messaging is something that we don't do too well.
Let's hear from this side of the room. Any questions over here?
I mean, Will Rogers said what? I'm not a member of any organized party, I'm a Democrat. So, it's been a long-standing problem.
Yeah, David Quam Chilmark. Just one of the things we've lost in this country is the ability to compromise.
Yeah.
And that's a tragedy, whether it's Republican or Democratic. And you talked about gerrymandering, but we see both state legislatures, Republican or Democratic, drawing districts to their advantage. How do we get back so we have a dialogue and compromise, which is what we all really want?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. And that's one of the reasons why we took on the problem of gerrymandering. I mean, gerrymandering allows people, Democrats as well as Republicans, although Princeton did a study back of the process in 2011, the time before last, when we did our redistricting, and said it was the worst gerrymandering of the last 50 years. But if you, in a gerrymandered safe seat, you can do things that are inconsistent with the desires of your constituents and not suffer any electoral consequence. You're not worried about a general election. You're only worried about getting primaried. And so to compromise is seen as a sign of weakness that invites primary challenger. And so that's why this fight for fair redistricting that we started back in 2017, I think is so important. Because the reality is, Democrats don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. Republicans have, some good ideas, a couple. So they have some good ideas. And it is the interaction of Democrats and Republicans and using those good ideas from both sides that actually advances the ball in a way that I think history has shown us is most efficient. So my hope would be that through the redistricting that we've now gone through, and that has led to, with some glaring exceptions, a much more fair redistricting process that has more, we have more seats that are going to be able to be contested by both parties, with glaring exceptions. Texas, Georgia, Wisconsin, Florida, real problematic states. I hope that with that, and with a greater involvement of the American people, we can get back to that place where cooperation is forced on us. But there's also a sleeping dog here, and that is, I don't know the appropriate term, maybe I shouldn't have said it, young people. The biggest voting bloc in this country right now are young people, but young people don't have the power that they should have because they don't vote to the same degree that my generation, baby boomers, we vote in very high proportion. And so we have the ability to shape the agenda in ways that young people do not, because they don't participate in the process to the degree that they should. You bring young people into the mix, they don't have a lot of, for instance, the racial baggage, that my generation has. I think about when I made the decision not to defend the Defense of Marriage Act, coming home and talking to my oldest daughter, Maya, and saying, hey, I want to tell you something your dad did, big deal, I'm not going to defend DOMA for same-sex marriage. Big deal, right? And she kind of looked at me like, okay, well, why would you want to stop people who want to get married from being married? And I said, all right, so I'm disappointed. She doesn't think her dad did anything good. But then I thought to myself, that's actually, think about that. She thought this was not that big a deal. And that's reflective of a mindset that I think, and a whole range of issues that young people have, but they don't force the issue because they don't, or force the issues because they don't vote to the degree that they should. But you're right, that notion of compromise, our political system is now constructed in such a way where compromise is not valued. You're in a gerrymandered seat, you're worried about a primary as opposed to a general election. You don't compromise. We have gridlock, nothing gets done, which breeds cynicism. It's kind of a doom loop that we have to somehow, get out of. That's a good observation, though.
It's interesting. In Washington, a lot of people don't know it, but young people who work on the Hill, they secretly have get-togethers. Yeah. Republicans and Democrats, they don't want to let their bosses know about it, but even they are eager to talk and develop some sort of comity, across the other side, but they can't even let their bosses know about it. We have a microphone back here.
Stuart Lucas from Vineyard Haven. How do we restore confidence that the vote actually is the vote, gerrymandering and laws notwithstanding? There's still all this talk about voter fraud.
I didn't hear the last part.
How do we convince people that the vote is the vote, that the vote is valid and accurate, because we hear quite a bit about voter fraud, and we have seen our former president talk about ways that you shouldn't trust the vote to sort of prejudge the process.
Well, one of the things we can't listen to the noise. I mean, there's no problem with voter fraud in this country. I don't care how many times people say it, and they find, this woman in Texas who was an ex-felon, or was a ex-felon, was told that she could vote. She cast a ballot mistakenly. She gets 5 years in jail. This guy, a Trump guy in Pennsylvania, voted for his wife, tried to use his wife's ballot. He got probation. Okay, whatever. So there are these isolated incidents that get blown out of proportion. There's no huge amount of voter fraud. We just had the greatest turnout in 2020 in the history of this nation in terms of the numbers of people who voted through the mails, through drop boxes, through a whole range of things. no widespread indications of voter fraud. The Brennan Center, as we say in the book, says that you're more likely to get hit by lightning than to cast an in-person fraudulent ballot.
But does that, to take the other question, does that messaging, does there need to be a campaign of messaging to defend the process?
No,
the validity of the process?
I think that's exactly right. You know, the way in which you justify these anti-democracy measures is to say they're all designed to prevent voter fraud. We need voter IDs so that we prevent in-person voter fraud. We need to restrict voting hours or the number of places so that we can make sure that they're adequately, a whole range of things to prevent voter fraud. And we hear this voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud, stolen election, stolen election, stolen election. And the reality, it's just not true. And so there needs to be, I would take the media a little to task for this one. You know, you can't say that, or, you know, just report it this way. Republicans say there's huge amounts of voter fraud. Democrats say there's not. That can't be the story. It's kind of like, you know, Republicans say it's raining outside. Democrats say it's not raining outside. Well, tell me, is it raining outside or not? Tell me, you know. Our media's got to, and they will be charged with being partisan by, you know, by conservatives, Republicans. You just got to deal with that, you know? And so there's a media thing, there's a messaging thing that Democrats have to do. If you are allowed to vote, your vote will count, although there are, what I'm concerned about, and one of the things, reasons why we're expanding what we do at the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, there are now, this woman, there's an article in the New York Times, probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, a woman named Cleta Mitchell, and talks about how they are trying to gather up people to run for the lowest level electoral offices so that they will have control at the lowest level of our electoral infrastructure. And so that gives me a great deal of concern that could actually shape or have an impact on whether or not your vote actually counts.
We have a question right here. We're going to bring the microphone to you.
Actually,
why
I
don't we do
was-
this and then we'll come to you in a second.
It's on? Oh, yeah, so Paul Flippin, DC and Oak Bluffs, want to be more in Oak Bluffs, but, yeah, prosecute, absolutely. You know, the two examples that you brought up, Georgia and you know, saying this is corrupt to the Justice Department, we'll take care of it. However, question, isn't it hard to prove intent and easy to defend? And what that would do to the country in the process?
I'm going to do one thing is hold that question. So intent, is it hard to prove? And then we're going to let this gentleman ask a question, and then we're going to try to answer both of them at the same time because we're running up against the clock. And so,
So you presume I'm going to be able to remember the first question?
I got you. Don't worry, I got you. Thank you.
Alan Lipke, Chilmark, and Tampa. I was not aware that there had been a massive amount of gerrymandering prevented, redistricting made more fair. So those examples you named, Florida, Texas, whatever.
Georgia. Yeah.
What is the single greatest difference between your success in the other states and the failure in that state? Is it targeting or what?
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's take the question from Oak Bluffs first, the gentleman who asked about intent and the difficulty in proving that.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying before, intent, you know, you've always got to prove in a criminal case that the defendant intended to do that which he or she is charged with. And I just gave two, you know, examples there that show Trump's intent. I really don't think it is going to be as big a problem as people seem to think, because I just cited those two examples, and remember what I said before, you know, gradually and then suddenly. The January 6th committee is getting more people who are coming in, and that's going to help, I think, the Justice Department. Justice Department, you know, they're ramping up in a whole bunch of different ways. I suspect you're going to see people thinking themselves about what is it going to mean to me, you know? If I don't cooperate with the feds here, and they've got charges on me, well, I'm now going to tell you about what Trump said. Cipollone, for instance, he didn't answer questions to the January 6th committee citing privilege. I think inappropriately so, not because I don't think he has privilege for some of the things that he was asked about. Like he was asked, for instance, what did Mark Meadows tell you that Trump told Mark Meadows? He said, well, that's privilege. There's no privilege between you and Meadows. But in any case, in front of a federal grand jury, we're going to hear Meadows in some form or fashion. I think we'll hear from him about what Trump said on January the 6th. And in the lead up to January the 6th, we'll hear the things that Cipollone did not necessarily share with the January 6th committee. So I think we're going to see I get a lot of this is just a feel that I get for public corruption cases and the way they go. I think we're going to get a lot more intent information, though I think there is sufficient intent there even now. I don't think at this point there is a basis to charge Trump with the violence on January the 6th. I don't think there is necessarily that connection as yet. But if you're talking about trying to obstruct the transfer of power and all that happened before, I think that you've got sufficient.
You think it's there
evidence
already?
I think there's sufficient evidence there
And
already.
the gentleman's question from Schumer.
You know, what we did at the NDRC was take each state individually and come up with a different plan for each state, figuring out what is it that would work in each state. And so in some states, it was a question of working electorally to put into place in the state legislatures people who would be committed to doing the redistricting process in a fair way. In some places, it meant bringing lawsuits. And we've been successful in North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Successful in Ohio. Supreme Court says you've got to redistrict, this is gerrymandered. Republicans have just ignored the state Supreme Court, so that one still has to get resolved. So electoral stuff, bringing lawsuits, and then putting in place also these independent commissions so that you take the redistricting out of the hands of politicians altogether and give it to these neutral commissions and have them decide. I mean, the hardest thing in the world is to tell a self-interested politician to just draw a fair district, make your district fair. Politicians are like, hey, I want my district to be 80% Democratic. I don't want it to be 50-50. That means I might actually have to interact with my constituents. I might actually have to campaign. And so putting in place those independent commissions, as we have in Michigan, for instance, which is badly gerrymandered before, fundamentally different now. And whenever we had the ability to put before the people of a state the choice between letting it happen as it always has or putting in place an independent commission, the people, including Republicans, conservatives, progressives, Democrats, independents, all voted for it. And so we had votes for independent commissions in Utah, Missouri, Virginia, Michigan, Colorado. Now then, you saw in Utah and in Missouri, Republican legislators really kind of crippled those commissions. And so you have to fight yet again to make sure that they have the power that they should have. But so it depended. Different things in different states. Lawsuits, electoral efforts, independent commissions, and then getting people, raising the consciousness of the people about how important gerrymandering and redistricting was. When we started in 2017, I talk about gerrymandering, redistricting, you can see people's eyes glaze over, whatever. But if you tell folks, if you care about a woman's right to choose, if you care about gun safety, if you care about climate, if you care about protecting voting rights, criminal justice reform, all that is decided by people who serve in state legislatures. And if you want to have those things progress, you've got to have the ability for the people who support all of these things to have voice, to give voice to give political voice to those desires.
Thank you all for coming out this evening.
What? Hold it. Whoa. Are we at the end?
We're at the end. I was just going to say.
I just want to say one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So one of the questions I think that was asked, how do we reverse this? And I was talking about civic engagement. I think this is critical. It's on us. It's on us. It's not, the cavalry is not going to come. We are the cavalry, and so it's up to us to make sure that this happens. We did an event before, and I ended it this way. Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Yes.
But here's the deal. It doesn't bend on its own. It only bends when people like us put our hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. And so each and every one of us has to ask ourselves is, what have you done to pull that arc towards justice? It's not enough to look at the TV and yell at Fox and throw things, or look at MSNBC if you're a Republican, and throw things. What have you done? What have you done to make this nation more fair, more just? What have you done to make this nation live up to its founding ideals? The book talks about a whole bunch of people who sacrificed, who died in order that the nation be made better. I am confident that this generation, if we have a bit of that spirit, and remember who we are as Americans. I mean, this country took on the mightiest empire in the world. We are a revolutionary country. We fought for our independence. We fought for the right of the people to decide the direction of the nation. If we remember those kinds of things, if we get involved in the ways that I have described, this generation can have its rendezvous with destiny, as Roosevelt said. It's up to us. We can do it, so put your hands on that arc and pull it towards justice.
Thank you, Larry. All of you this evening will get a copy of this book. As you note here, the subtitle of the book is The Violent Past and Imperiled Future of the Vote. I look forward to seeing you on the beaches of the island reading this book. But I'm going to ask you one thing, because we'd heard that young people don't participate. I'm so glad to see young people in the audience. But you all have your own copy of the book. The one thing I would ask you to do, and not just to drive up book sales for my friend, but to also share this book with young people. Buy a copy for the young people in your lives, so they can understand the history of the vote, so they can better understand what is at stake in this moment. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Eric Holder. This has been wonderful.